Hi, U.S. history students. Today we are going to cover Richard Nixon's presidency, Virginia SOL 12 and 13. We're going to cover your notes before class today. And while the PlayPosit is not graded, some of the questions that are on the PlayPosit will be directly copied into your Class Connect quiz. So hopefully you will stay with me today, and this will help you get a better grade on your Class Connect quiz. So first up, we're going to look at this cartoon. We see the leaders of Russia on the left and Mao Zedong from China on the right. And they definitely appear to be at odds, even though they are both communist-controlled countries. The reality of the situation going on in the 1960s is that while China and the Soviet Union were communist, their relationship was deteriorating because they both wanted communist control of the world. They had slightly different versions of communism. They both became rivals for territory and diplomatic influence, and they both wanted to be the superior communist power in the world. We also need to remember they share a very long border. So there are definitely land rivalries between the two countries as well. President Nixon is going to take advantage of this deteriorating relationship between the two, and he is going to begin to focus some of his foreign policy on China and start to reestablish a relationship with China. Now, the U.S. had cut off relations with China when they became communist in 1949, when China became the People's Republic of China. We had previously had good relations with China, but once they fell to communism, the U.S. cut off all ties. President Nixon will begin a policy called detente, which is essentially just an easing of hostility between two countries. Detente is just a general term. It's not specific to China and the U.S. We are going to see detente a little bit later between the U.S. and the Soviet Union as well. But essentially, an easing of hostility, and Nixon himself is going to travel to China with his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Due to relaxed tensions between the United States and China, the Soviet Union is also going to come to the table to work with the United States on the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And essentially, because the Soviet Union sees that the U.S. is willing to work with China, willing to have some detente, that makes Soviet negotiators a little bit more willing to talk to the U.S. as well. We're starting to see a little bit of a chink in the armor of this, Cold War mentality. So what is the SALT Treaty all about? Basically, it is setting limits on intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic launchers. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, if you break down the word intercontinental, that basically means a missile designed for nuclear weapons delivery over a range higher than 3,300 miles. These missiles, or ICBMs, as they're often called, can deliver a nuclear weapon from the Soviet Union to the U.S. territory or vice versa. So obviously, we're going to want to limit those. And the U.S. and China do come to an initial agreement in the SALT treaties, and we will be following up with more treaties we'll see under Reagan's presidency. What's going on the domestic front? The big case in the 70s, landmark case, was Roe v. Wade. Now, Roe v. Wade was a case between Jane Roe, the plaintiff, and that is actually a pseudonym. Her real name was Norma McCorvey. Jane Roe sued the Dallas County, Texas, and they were represented by Wade, the district attorney for Dallas County, Texas, because she believed that she should have the right to abortion. And at this time, Texas law made abortion illegal unless there was a doctor's note to save a woman's life. Texas argued that the Constitution did not confer a right to abortion, and Texas fell on the side of protecting the potentiality of human life, and thus severely limiting the access to abortion to only cases in which the mother's life was in danger. So this case came before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided in favor of the right to privacy, in favor of Jane Roe, and essentially what that meant was that states could not limit abortion clinics from operating. And at this point, then, all states had to allow abortions to happen in their state. This case was on the books until 2002, just recently, when Dobbs v. Jackson overturned Roe v. Wade. And essentially what Dobbs said is that abortion is not a constitutional right, and it is something that should be left to the states. So it is not that abortion was made illegal nationwide, but essentially states could limit abortion if they chose, and many did. Many chose to place restrictions on abortions after a certain point. And so there is kind of a range of laws depending on which state you're talking about. So more conservative states have either made it illegal or heavily restricted it, and more liberal-leaning states and state legislators have allowed it to remain in place. Obviously, this is still a very controversial issue. I recommend you discussing this with your family, with other trusted adults in your life, and then, coming to your own decision on this case and, kind of where you land on this spectrum between Roe v. Wade and Dobbs. And last up, the Watergate scandal. Richard Nixon was famous because he was the only president to resign office. And the reason for that is because it was found that he authorized a break-in of the Democratic National Convention headquarters, and they were located in the Watergate Hotel. Nixon himself did not break into the Watergate Hotel, but he authorized certain men to do so, to try to steal some tapes. And at first, it was not apparent that these men were operating under the orders of Nixon. That came out in subsequent months as some investigative journalism on the part of Washington Post journalists Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, and they uncovered this connection to Nixon that then eventually led to an investigation, and Nixon was forced to resign. So